Now, we just want to look at latest information. It might not be final. KwaZulu-Natal, 10 hung councils, Gauteng 5, Mpumalanga 2, Northwest 9, the Western Cape 16, the Eastern Cape 2, Limpopo 2. As this conversation continues, the legal framework that you were talking about earlier, the Municipal Structural Act, requiring that as soon as a final result is given, within 14 days, councils must be formed. Are we going to see a need for by-elections?
Well, I would want to believe that it's not actually going to be necessary. The reason why I'm saying so is that I believe that the political parties will be able to find each other and that there will be an agreement. Just listening to all different political parties and the leaders, pronouncing on this particular issue, I think everybody is committed to having to work together.
Mr. Tselane, why do you say that when the DA has expressly said that they are not going into coalitions with the ANC and the EFF, and Herman Mashaba's party has said that they're not going into coalitions with the African National Congress, and in some councils, as we see, it's the ANC and the DA in the lead, and the smaller parties have insignificant percentages, and in some cases, no seats at all?
No, I think most of the political parties, because they did not anticipate this kind of results, have not reflected properly on the issue. They've got to go back now and reflect on the outcome of the results.
So it's a different conversation now?
No, absolutely. I mean, look, even if the political parties thought that a by-election would be a solution, and which I believe is not, it could still produce the same results. Then what do? Another by-election?
Yeah.
Another by-election. And then in the meantime, what happens to the communities that are expecting services to be rendered to them? So political parties will come to a realization.
Not only that, the same communities who have in this election shown that they are not interested, how do you hope to bring them back once again?
That is a program that all the political parties in their reflection have got to look into. They've got to try to understand exactly what really caused a situation where people decided not to participate in this election. My view is that non-participation is actually participation, particularly because this time around it was so organized, in a sense that there were quite a number of communities that were saying...
It could be participation, but what does it say to the credibility of the democratic process in that area?
Indeed, what you're saying is correct. That it is the fact that public representatives have not actually delivered services that the communities expect from them has actually discredited the whole democratic project, to the extent that people now are beginning to look at alternative ways of engaging public representatives. They realize that formal structures are not yielding the kind of the results that they actually require. So this provides a moment for political leaders and political parties to go back to the drawing board and begin to reflect deeply about what needs to be done in order to begin to address this situation before it deteriorates even further.
I know we're talking about coalitions, but there's a development now. I think we're going to show it on our screens as a breaking story. The NFP going to the courts to try and block results in KZN because of questions about credibility. This puts a spanner in the works in terms of those conversations about coalitions.
Indeed. I mean, there have been quite a number of difficulties that the Commission encountered during these elections. And then hopefully this is the action of the NFP is not going to seriously disrupt the current arrangement of now having to deal with the outcome of the results of the election. But of course, any political party that is disaffected by the decision and the practices of the Commission has got the right to go to courts, because courts are always available as instruments in law to deal with whatever dissatisfaction that a political party may be having.
I'm going to include a new guest into our conversation, but before I do that, I just want to read that statement that came out. NFP goes to court to halt the announcement of final election results. The National Freedom Party will this afternoon approach the Pietermaritzburg High Court seeking to halt the announcement of the results following the Independent Electoral Commission's reluctance to accede to a party demand for a recount. The party is convinced that Ndumbe is one of the hung councils in KwaZulu-Natal. The party is convinced that Ndumbe, we convincingly won at least 7 wards, but final results from the commission show that the party won 6. We are challenging this in court. We have approached our lawyers and we expect them to go to court this afternoon. All we want is the recount of Ward 1 and 3 because our own assessment and counting is that we were robbed. We laid a formal complaint with the commission yesterday before 1 p.m. when we communicated with our lawyers, and after consulting with our legal team, they advised us to take the matter to court. Hence, our lawyer is preparing papers to file in the Pietermaritzburg High Court this afternoon. We want to halt the announcement of the final results scheduled to take place this afternoon. The results cannot be announced or pronounced before our matter is resolved. We worked hard campaigning and we know what we deserve in Ndumbe. Hence our decision to go to court. We'll be speaking to Kenyan of the NFP later on. But onto this now, the East African country of Kenya has a regulatory body for political party coalitions. It's called the Registrar of Political Parties. For more on this, let's bring into the conversation we've been having with Mr. Tselane, and we're keeping him in the conversation, Oscar Obonyo, a senior political journalist in Kenya. A very good morning and thanks for making the time to speak to us this morning, Mr. Obonyo.
Yes, how are you?
We're well, thank you. South Africa is just coming out of local government elections, and as the results finalize, a clearer picture is showing that there's going to be a need for conversation about coalitions. What exactly is the role of the Register of Political Parties in Kenya, and how can it help in this conversation?
Well, the Register of Political Party is an office that came into force after the 2010 constitutional reform. The idea behind it was simply to regularize the way parties can operate, to control the registration of political parties, and also ensure that there is healthy democratic practices that are practiced in the political parties. Ideally, Kenya has had the coalition arrangements right from independence in 1963, when the major parties, Kenya African National Union and the Kenya African Democratic Union, that is KANU and KADU, joined hands. Actually, then the persuasion was to make sure that the country stands and the country can move forward and execute what it's required to do to make sure that the country is on the right step to development. KANU, the ruling party then of the founding father of the country, Jomo Kenyatta, collapsed courtesy of coalition arrangement. That was in 2002. So in 2002, courtesy of then we had a coalition arrangement which eventually ended the life of KANU. It was called NAC, National Rainbow Coalition. So it has been a way of life. So this office came into place in 2010 because this arrangement of coalition was word of mouth. It was a memorandum of understanding. So there was need to regulate it and give it the legal standing. So that is why it was incorporated into the constitution, so that political parties can have a clear way of operating. So the office actually, it helps to regulate the formation of political parties, the registration and funding of political parties. And where political parties disagree, there is another office that has also been set by the Constitution, that is the Political Parties Disputes Tribunal. Parties, before entering into a coalition, have to send their memorandum of understanding and terms of their understanding and working together. They deposit these details with this office so that when there is a dispute arising from a coalition arrangement,
it can be regulated.
This office is able to interpret and make sure that the dispute is resolved.
Mr. Tselane, those coalition agreements that you were saying we need to get into, but also just use case study from other countries, for in this instance Kenya, in terms of how we're supposed to approach it. South Africa is pretty mature in terms of legislation, but we're lacking just in this part.
Absolutely. I like the Kenyan model, even though it's got its own limitations, but it is something that we can learn from, particularly because in the Kenyan situation, as you can see, what normally happens is that once the political parties have reached an agreement, they deposit that agreement with the register of political parties, and then they are accountable, therefore, to the register of political parties in terms of the agreements and the terms that they have deposited with that particular office. So it is something that we should actually consider in South Africa, but go perhaps beyond that and create those deadlock breaking mechanisms, such as what you normally have within CCMA. I've indicated that because CCMA has got two critical aspects that could be something that could be imported into the coalition arrangement, which is that aspect of conciliation and arbitration. So when there is a dispute between the political parties, they can go through conciliation and try to resolve the issue through conciliation. But secondly, arbitration, and then arbitration award should be final. But if they are not if they are still disaffected or unhappy with the decisions or the approach by a particular political partner, then the electoral court should actually be available as another instrument in law that can actually deal with it.
Just give us a sense, Mr. Obonyo, of the enforceability of these agreements in Kenya. How legally binding are they?
Well, the office actually operates as a quasi-judicial body, which simply means that it enjoys part of the judicial powers, and it operates in a very judicial way with a chairman who must be a magistrate. But then it doesn't have binding judicial power. But it is required that if you have to proceed to the courts in this country, then you must exhaust all the avenues, including dispute resolution. So you really must go through this office and go to the political parties dispute tribunal, have your case looked into, assessed, and a ruling made. But in most of the times, the political parties dispute resolution has proved to do its work diligently, because there's normally an understanding between this office and the courts. So in very few cases have we had cases where the ruling has been overturned. So it is a very critical office because it's there to ensure that disputes are resolved, and it's a long process. So it also reduces the clogging of electoral-related cases in the High Court.
And with that, we're going to thank you for engaging with us, Oscar Obonyo, a senior political journalist in Kenya, just giving us a sense of how other countries are handling this conversation about coalitions. A memory, Mr. Tselane, of the 2016 outcomes where the EFF was saying they might go into government with the Democratic Alliance, but they are not signing anything. They are not in coalition with them. It's just a partnership. How will parties now be approaching this process?
I think we have learned from 2016 that unfortunately the kind of the coalitions we had were not stable. They did not really yield proper results to the constituencies that elected them or to the electorate in general. And therefore, there's got to be an improvement from what we produced in 2016. Now, part of the problem also with the agreements is that if you don't have a proper program around service delivery issues, then it becomes a very hollow agreement. So that's why I'm suggesting that in fact, starting from now, there's got to be clear principles, protocols, but principles on their own also don't mean anything. We've got to develop a program around those principles so that every person now begins to understand what are the kind of the things in the short term, medium term, as well as long term that a partnership is supposed to be achieved.
Terry Tselane, thank you so much for spending the hour talking to us about just trying to have a look forward to the possible coalitions that will be taking place as the results start coming in. We're going to wrap this hour up, take a short break, see you at the top of the next hour.